Okay, so today we're going to talk about NACAC and the trends we have been seeing in college admissions. We are monitoring the chat during this. So I can see some of you are saying chat is disabled, but um, I can see all of your chat. So if you ask a question or any of that, I can look through those and monitor those throughout the session as well. So we're going to begin now. So we were able to go to NACAC at the end of September. It was held in Baltimore this year, and we were able to talk to a lot of the college admissions reps, hearing what the trends are, hearing what's going on in the college landscape. Like everything else, the colleges have been significantly impacted by COVID. So I think that and I know from speaking to college reps that the college trends that we maybe once saw is not the same college trends that we are seeing currently.
Yeah, how do I enable chat?
So they talked a lot about how COVID has impacted them, their admission cycle, all of those things. Ms. Director, are you with us?
I'm trying to be.
We're working on it.
Hi.
Oh, we can't hear you.
Hi.
Oh, we can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Good morning, everybody. I'm so sorry about the technical difficulties. I don't know what I would do without Mrs. Baglio. Okay, great. So we're super happy to have you here today. This is going to be the first of Jen Poma's webinar chats. And as you know, as we talked about, we will be, okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. We're going to just talk about our experience at the National Association for College Admissions Counseling meeting that we just attended 2 weeks ago in Baltimore, Maryland. We learned so much. We felt that this first meeting would be a great idea just to share that learning with you. So I'll turn it back over to my co-host.
Yes, and I see most of you saying the chat is disabled, but the Q&A box is on. So it's fine if you want to ask or the webinar box, whatever you want to call it. If you want to ask your questions in that, we can monitor the Q&A box. So I'm not sure at this point why chat is disabled, but it's okay. We will see in the Q&A box all of your questions. So Lori, I was just going over the college admissions trends since COVID and how COVID has impacted, college admissions as well as K through 12, the world. But the trends that we're seeing these days in college admissions is much different than what they were pre-COVID. So we were able to talk to a lot of the larger universities, their admissions reps directly. And some of the things that we were hearing was a lot of those larger universities saw a record number of applicants last year. And they don't know why that is. They don't know if that's an impact of COVID. They're not sure, but the point is being that they saw a record number of applications. So what is becoming the new norm, and I think, some people felt it last year and it was starting to be a trend last year, was the deferrals of applications. A student would apply maybe early decision, early action, and they would be deferred to the regular pool and not know their decision until the regular pool comes out. So that came out of the mouth of lots of college reps, how they're using the deferral process. They're using, and just so you get like a sneak peek on like the college side, they're also using the deferral process to protect their institution as well. So institutions on the college side, and I'm sure many of you see these, they tout them when you come for college visits. Many of them are looking at their rankings. Their rankings are comprised of all the things, but a lot of rankings are comprised of graduation rates, specifically 4- and 6-year graduation rates, and retention rates, meaning are they keeping students there? The big one that they look at is 1st to 2nd year retention rate. And 1st to 2nd year retention rate is a big one because they are taking students right out of high school preliminarily. and they're seeing if they're staying into their second year and continuing at that college. So what the defer does for the college is it protects those numbers in a sense. If a student was to be deferred and maybe they start their second year or their third year there, they don't count in their graduation or retention rates. So I think more colleges are using these to help their numbers as well, but that's why we're seeing it as a new national norm. Ms. Director, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
So it's so I'll just explain to some parents who might be going through the college process for the first time a little bit about the retention rates, and some of you may know what that's about and why it's important. But in addition to when we look at acceptance rates of a school, and part of the challenge with navigating this terrain right now is you are looking at data from 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago, and acceptance rates look much different. We really need to be looking at rates within the last 3 years. And now let's talk about retention, because retention rates during the pandemic, if you were a student, let's say you were a freshman in 2019-20, after that, with all the uncertainty, there were many students that didn't return to school, and it almost had nothing to do with the school. It could have had lots more to do with the fact that parents were paying full tuition for a private school to get a virtual college experience, and lots of kids made different decisions. So it's a very hard time to look at data. But in a typical time, retention data is important because it might, first of all, if you look at a school that has a 90% retention rate, that means that 9 out of 10 kids were happy enough to return in the second year. And it also means that 9 out of 10 kids were getting the financial assistance. Some schools give a really generous package in the first year, and then in the second year, maybe not so much. So these are all of the things to pay attention to. But we did see that, I want to transition back to the topic of deferrals. I think this past admission cycle, and Jenny, I know you lived it on the higher ed side last year. Living it on the high school side last year, it was quite surprising for many students and families and us counselors, because the students were getting deferred at schools that we were really very surprised and didn't know where this was coming from. But many of the larger institutions are using it to craft a class, and they have less now to sort of wager the interest of a student. So how do they, gauge the interest of the student? So students, how do we know? Well, if a student applies early decision, they know, right, that you've selected that school. But not every student can apply early decision. It's not a tool that can be used by everyone. So for early action applicants, which the majority of our Schreiber kids, and quite honestly, most of our communities here in the North Shore of Long Island, most of our kids are applying to the majority of their schools through early action, and the colleges now need some sort of measure in this record number of applications to gauge out serious interest.
So you mentioned ED and EA. There's actually a question in the chat box, so I'll repeat it for everyone. How can a child apply ED2, which we're seeing also a new trend that we're seeing a lot more schools providing and offering ED2. Will they know about ED1 results in good timing? So I can take that question, and Lori, feel free to add, whatever. So what I have been seeing, I've been sitting with a lot of reps. We talked to a lot of reps at NACAC. They're providing ED2 as another opportunity to say, I want to go to that school. So that's the first thing. It used to be ED1 was November 1, and maybe by November 1, you don't know if you can commit to a school because, like we said, ED, you're going there no matter what. If you get in, whether they give you some financial assistance, whether they don't, you're making a big commitment. And some families were struggling with making that commitment by November 1 or October 15th. Some of them are even moving up to October 15th these days. So they rolled out ED2. In my experience at NACAC, sitting with these college reps, colleges, while their actual application deadlines are slightly different, colleges are aware that ED1 and ED2 are going on. So most colleges that I have spoken to is giving a good amount of time to when they get their ED1 application to the ED1 decision, and giving that family more time to either go ED2 at other schools or the same institution. So they are giving, in my understanding, and again, this is very new to the trend of higher ed, the application process, the college admission system, but my understanding is that ED2, they are giving more than enough time for students to get their notifications from ED1 to decide if they'd like to go ED2 elsewhere. Do you want to add anything?
So I will. I'll also answer. So we have a question from a parent, and I thank you for asking this question. If we could just clarify some of the abbreviations that were being used. So when we talk about ED, that's early decision, and early action, we talk about EA. If there's something else that we used, please let me know and we'll clarify that. So ED1 and ED2, I think let's talk a little bit about that and what the differences are. And again, so just as a refresher, early decision means that you are committing to that one school. Your child is saying, you are my favorite school, and if I get in, you are committed to attending. So your child has to sign a little agreement there in the application saying that they understand the terms of early decision. We as counselors have to sign. Your counselor, your child's counselor has to sign saying that they understand and that they have spoken to your student about what the terms are. I will tell you that colleges do not take it lightly. If a student decides not to go to that school, it's not a good look. It's not a good look for Schreiber, and it's not a great look for the student. So, and the other thing to keep in mind is that financially speaking, early decision, the colleges, you are committing to that school regardless of the financial aid package. So as a family, you need to really understand that this is a commitment. So that's whether or not early decision 1 or early decision 2. So early decision 2, the difference really is timing. And I know Ms. Palma just had mentioned that. Some of the counselors here, so our kids now are getting ready to hit submit on their early decision 1 applications or early action. Let me clarify, early action, you've got flexibility, right? You can apply, you are not committed. So the early decision 2 dates sometimes occur. Students sometimes make a decision to do early decision 1 if they didn't get into the first school. Colleges will post on their websites. It's really important to take a look at this. If you are applying early decision 1 to any school, look at their website. Let them know that, look at the website and they will tell you when you can expect the decision.
I also just want to clarify something, because I may have said it while I was speaking. Generally they cannot apply to ED2 if they've been deferred from ED1. So I may have said something when I was talking. I meant that they can apply ED1 at a school and they will know, so early decision, the binding, they will know a decision, and then they will have ample amount of time to decide if they want to go early decision 2 at another school. I hope I clarified that. I'm sorry if I misspoke earlier. So again, like we said, there's ample amount of time to decide. The trend is we're seeing a lot of early action. And while we're talking about, what kind of decisions there is always still regular decision pool as well. So something important to note, we had Georgetown come here the other day and meet with a lot of our students. And they shared, and I thought it was an important thing to share, they shared that actually only a third of their class comes from their early decision pool. So 2/3 of their class is coming from their regular decision pool. And I think sometimes when we think about early if we can get our applications in early, it's great. It's another chance for them to look at them. But if we get deferred to regular decision, it doesn't always mean the worst thing. That a lot of these schools are actually crafting a lot of their class and most of their class from their regular decision.
So, and it does make things really confusing because Rupali just asked a question about colleges if they're changing their deadlines because of the FAFSA. And by and large, they're not changing it. So what's happening, many of these early decision schools, you have to submit the CSS profile. And I apologize, I cannot remember exactly what the acronym stands for with that one, but it's another College Board collaboration where it's a separate financial document. And what most schools are doing is parents have to submit the CSS profile, and then some schools will readjust or adjust based on the FAFSA, but that's not going to be later on, unfortunately. But we're not seeing any early decision 1 dates changing due to that.
So there's another question about some of the universities that we spoke to while we were at NACAC. So we spoke to University of Pittsburgh, we spoke to Indiana University, we spoke to Wisconsin, we spoke to University of Michigan, Michigan State, University of Connecticut. So those are some of the larger ones we spoke to. We were able to speak to a lot of the smaller universities as well. So for those of you that don't know NACAC or what NACAC is, we should have maybe started with this. It's a collaboration that's a conference where school counselors come together as long as college admissions professionals, and we're able to kind of talk through the admissions process. We're able to network. We're able to enjoy some sessions that are given by either school counselors or college admissions professionals. So there was one of the nights, there was a huge college fair. So when you all think, if some of you have been through the college process before, it's like when you go to a college fair with your students and are able to talk to all the reps. So us as school counselors were able to go to the super large, it was large, college fair, and we were able to talk to all of the reps. So we were able to get some good information from them. So like I mentioned, we were able to talk to a lot of the big ones, a lot of the ones that we know Schreiber students are interested in applying to as well. Do you want to add anything to that?
So I'll talk about, so the question was really about large universities, and I get it. You know, lots of our students are interested in large universities. One of the things, and this was really, I wouldn't call it a response, but I just, whether working in this capacity here in Port Washington or in the other places that I've looked, and maybe some of you have seen this with some of your students, kids tend to talk about the same 20 or 25 schools. And it's usually based on, and I get it, if you have a particular school that's woven in the framework of your family, absolutely, your students are going to be interested. But when you think about the big NCAA schools for whatever, whether it's football, basketball, whatever it is, one of the things I particularly love about March Madness is there's always an underdog from a smaller school, and it makes it very, very exciting. And it's often a school that the kids never hear of. So one particular group that is at that, both Jen and I really like this group, very small liberal arts colleges. Now, they're not for everybody, but they are super academic and rigorous, but have the acceptance rates may not be as tight as some of the other ones because they're not the ones that you're going to see out in the media or, in social media. So if any of you are familiar with the Colleges That Change Lives, that was another group. It's a consortium of 44 colleges across the United States. Some very super academic, small liberal arts places. Not for everybody. Not every student is interested in a small school, but we also met with and collaborated with members from that consortium as well.
So there's some questions in the box as well. So the question is, if you're an ED applicant, how do you know if you are fairly treated for financial aid if the college knows you are committed to their school, and why would they give you financial aid? And that's a really good question. And it's, you know, a lot of things that need to be thought about when it comes to, ED. My understanding is they do look at those applicants for financial aid, but you are committed either way. So if they choose to not give you scholarships, grants, or any of those things, your FAFSA will always be considered. But I think we're talking more about now like scholarship and grant funding. You're committed either way. So that's the important thing to know. And I think that's an internal process to every college. And every college says they are reviewed. We don't know to what extent. And then the other question is, it's still worth applying EA if a lot of applications are being deferred, and what percentage of applications are being deferred? I don't have an actual percentage of what's being deferred. We are just seeing the trend that it's in an upswing right now. And I think, like Ms. Director said, it's kind of hard to understand what the trends are since COVID, and we are looking at past data. So while I don't have a percentage point, it is being used more frequently. I think the thought is, when applying EA, you have another chance to be considered in the regular pool if your application is ready. If your application is not ready, or your student's application is not ready, I don't think it is the worst thing to apply in regular decision. They are looking at those applications as well, and they pull a majority of their class from those regular decision pools. Did that answer your question? I'm hoping.
I'll also just add, so I think too, this speaks to sort of broadening the pool a little bit. If your student is interested in looking at other options, and these are great research university options, so when we talk about, and I think about last year and the cycle and the surprises that we saw, I will say at the end of the day, our kids did really well. Many of them it had to be a nail biter up until the end. But, and the majority of colleges on the Common Application accept more than 50% of their students. So know that too. There's just a lot of attention around this sort of small group of either selective institutions or some of the very large, well-known research institutions. And quite frankly, we have in some cases dozens and dozens of students that apply to the same university. So while Schreiber kids, will get, depending on the school, will get more than a few students in, but some of those schools, they're not going to take. It just doesn't work like that, which leads me to another question about, do colleges look at Schreiber and compare students within the school? They absolutely do. And that's actually the metric that they're using, rather than, I know we often get asked questions about, well, this happens in this town and this happens in this town, and that's really great. However, the colleges are comparing our kids against our kids. They're looking at, they know our classes, they know our AP classes, they know our honors classes, our research classes, they understand our weighting system, they understand our GPA system, they know all of it. And here's another little secret. They know, even though we don't rank students, we do have to report. One of the things that gets generated on one of the reports is, so what's the highest GPA? And when they take a look at these things, colleges are they figure all this out. They do this. It's a science to them. They know what they're looking for. And one last thing I'll say regarding other towns, just so you also know, not only is it a good opportunity for us to collaborate with the colleges, it's also an opportunity for us to collaborate with colleagues from around here. We spent a considerable amount of time with the director of guidance from Roslyn, the director of guidance from Jericho. So I can say our practices are right in line with what's going on in other districts right now.
So with the, I'm going to answer the admissions questions first, and then I'll get back to the FAFSA question. FAFSA is on our minds, a lot of our minds. I get that. So the question is early action the same as rolling admission? No. So early action has a deadline, and that is they'll know earlier than a regular admissions pool. Rolling admissions is when the college does not, or the university does not have a formal deadline, and students can put their application in, and they are reviewed as their application comes in, and they usually get a response. It depends on the school, but we heard as little as 2 weeks, and we heard as long as like 6 weeks for rolling admissions. What I will say about rolling admissions is sometimes the thought is our application needs to be in first in order to get admitted into rolling admissions. And while earlier is better, they are crafting their class all the way up and through until May 1st. So they are considering every application that comes across their desk, and if it meets the criteria for you to be a student at their college or university. So I think that's really important to note about rolling admissions. Do you want to add anything before we move on to that?
No, I think that I think that you've covered it. If that's Natasha, I hope that answers your question. Do you want me to touch upon the FAFSA question, or do you want?
I mean, I can start and then we can kind of go back and forth.
You got it.
What I always recommended to parents and students, and for those of you who don't know, I did come from the higher ed sphere. So we worked with continuing students who asked about FAFSA and should they fill it out, should they not, what's going on. I always recommended, if you can, just fill it out. You don't know how they're going to look at it, and especially with the FAFSA being the better and new FAFSA that we have yet to see, but hopefully we'll see soon. We don't know how they're going to look at it. So I would say if you are in a space where you can fill out the FAFSA, I always recommend just filling out the FAFSA.
I'll just add to that, and Jen, since you haven't been through a full cycle here at Schreiber yet, we also have some community scholarships, and our families know how large our community scholarship here is, and some of them do ask for information from the FAFSA. The other thing to know when it comes to the FAFSA is in some schools it unlocks scholarships. So you just fill it out. It's not that difficult, and we are going to be going through a training here in October with the State University of New York so that we have all the questions answered about the new FAFSA. So just fill it out. And if for any particular reason, if a family is unable to fill out that FAFSA, A, you will not be barred from scholarships here. B, you will not be barred from scholarships at your university. So let me just make that very clear.
I think we have time for a couple more questions because I know we started a little late. So one of the questions is, do the colleges talk about how they're looking at freshman year of high school in this class with the impact of virtual learning and COVID may have impacted some of the students in their class more than others? So the short answer is yes. Every college knows that COVID happened. And a lot of the reps have actually mentioned it in their visits with our students this year, saying that they are well aware. I mean, it affected the higher ed sphere as well. The higher ed sphere went to virtual learning as well. And we saw some of the same challenges that K through 12 saw in virtual learning. So they are aware. How every school determines how they handle the year of COVID and what happened with those grades differs between schools. So if you are really interested, or your son or daughter or student is really interested in a school, I would ask them that question because it's going to differ by school, but they do know there was a significant impact from COVID and the way learning happened during that time. Do you want to add anything?
If you think about what colleges are dealing with right now, so many unknowns. Number one is test optional. Number two is COVID. Number three is the SCOTUS decisions. And I'm not going to get into that, but these are things that the schools are trying to figure out. There are so many things they're trying to figure out. And I don't know, I'm sure some of you saw the news from this morning about ACT being at its lowest. The scores were at their lowest in, I don't know how many years. I'm sorry about the phone. So yes, I mean, there's been a definite impact on learning. And if in fact you have a student who's learning was impacted. And since that time, you know, they've, you know, they'll want to know, so what is it that you did to overcome that? So, and students have that opportunity to explain it.
A lot of colleges also look for upward trends. So if a student struggled, particularly during their freshman year, which again, we know is considered, you know, this class's COVID year, but then they see sophomore, junior, and senior year went up significantly, colleges are going to look at that. They're going to notice that there was a difference. So that's something important to note as well. Really quick, I just want to revisit FAFSA. Someone asked, what is FAFSA? It's the free application for federal student aid. And I have to make sure I said that right. So it is how colleges determine by the government what financial aid packages you receive, whether it be loans, grants, Pell Grants in the New York State TAP, although there's a separate TAP, which we will get into next time. We're going to talk about scholarships, grants, and all that next time when we speak. But it is the free application for federal student aid. So I just wanted to touch upon that. And then, do you think we have time for one more question?
Sure.
Okay. So there was an important question here. What do they give more credits to, weighted or unweighted GPA? So there's a couple of things when it comes to that question. So like Ms. Director said, they are looking at Schreiber. They know what our weighted, they know what our GPA is, our scale, all of that. But when colleges actually get their applications, a ton of the colleges, if not all of the colleges, will kind of take apart transcripts and recalculate GPAs. Because if you think about it, Schreiber's GPA scale may be very different from other schools on Long Island, may be very different from other schools in Texas, California, you know, all these other states. So they look at, a lot of times, they'll look at core classes, they'll look at electives, they'll look at them separately, they'll look at them together. So they have different ways of reinventing GPAs. So I don't think they look at unweighted or weighted differently. I think they recalculate them, and they also look at Schreiber's GPA scale as well.
I'm going to, I know we said one last one, but I want to address, Kim Nauer has a question in here about the big state schools and their competitive, how competitive they are. I know we started a little bit late, so can we just answer this one too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to start? Or do you want me to start?
Oh, I can start. So okay. Yes, they're very competitive. And it depends on, it can depend on the program. Some of these schools, it depends on which, you know, are they applying to a certain program within the school? If they're, you know, applying liberal arts, it can be less competitive. And some of the big state schools are not as competitive as others. It really does depend. So I think your son and the conversation with your counselor would be really, really important here, because they're not all created equal. Some are extremely selective and, you know, even refer to themselves, if you're talking about like Michigan and UVA, University of Virginia, that are considered public Ivies, or the, you know, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Those are some of the most competitive large state schools to get into. So, but then, you know, if you're talking about others out there that, we had a student, one of the counselors here visited Ole Miss last year, University of Mississippi, loved it. Certainly not as competitive, but, you know, again, it's really going to come down to the fit of these schools. But if we're looking at schools like Wisconsin, Maryland, others that have gotten more, well, we're going to leave the University of California system out here because they're extremely competitive. One thing to know, one general thing to know about the out-of-state public schools, they have a percentage of out-of-state students that they will accept. And that's really pronounced in the University of Texas and the University of California systems. So it gets very, very hard for an out-of-state student to get into those schools. You want to add?
I mean, I think you covered a lot of it, and I'll just touch upon the out-of-state piece. It becomes very difficult because those are their state institutions, and I think sometimes, being from New York, we have the SUNY system, so there's 64 SUNY campuses. So we think, okay, we can apply to any SUNY school, and there's all different SUNY schools for everyone, but in other state systems, and again, I'm going to leave California out of it because there's a lot of them, but in other state systems, there's one big state university. So all of those in-state students for that school are applying to that school. So I think that's just something to keep in mind also. So I think the out-of-state piece is very important as well. All right. All right, well, we thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm going to be holding another one. I believe the date is Thursday, October 26th at 9 a.m., same time. And we're going to go over scholarships, grants, and all the fun things that come along with that. So thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, everybody. I want to just make a quick plug about tonight's Parent University at 7 o'clock here at Schreiber. I hope to see some of you then. And Jen, will we be using this same webinar link?
I have to check with
All right, so you'll get another link before the next one. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.